When it comes to the National Football League, or NFL, we often focus on the star quarterbacks, the game-winning plays, and the dramatic moments. But what if I told you that the people wearing the stripes, the referees, might be influencing the outcome of the game more than you think? Today, we're diving into the controversial world of NFL referees and whether they exhibit bias. You may not believe the evidence, but by the end of this video, you'll be left wondering, are NFL refs really neutral? Let's start by understanding the power and influence NFL referees hold over every game. From flagging penalties to determining the placement of the ball, these decisions can change the momentum, and ultimately, the outcome of a game. But can human error, or worse, conscious or unconscious bias, affect the integrity of the sport we love? Referee bias and human nature first. Let's address the elephant in the room. Humans are inherently biased. And NFL referees, despite being trained professionals, are human. Numerous studies have shown that human beings have unconscious biases that can manifest in all sorts of ways, whether it's related to race, status, or even subtle influences from a home crowd. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Sports Sciences revealed that referees, across various sports, are more likely to make calls in favor of the home team, particularly in high-pressure situations. This home field advantage bias is supported by data. Over a 30-year period, teams in the NFL won about 57% of games at home. Could referee bias be partially responsible for this? While fans contribute to the atmosphere, subtle referee decisions influenced by crowd reactions might be part of the equation. More shockingly, a study from MIT in 2020 analyzed over 10,000 NFL games and found that referees were 15% more likely to call penalties in favor of home teams, especially in critical moments. The noise, pressure, and energy of a packed stadium might lead refs to unconsciously favor the team with thousands of supporters in the stands. Star player bias. Are stars untouchable? Next, let's talk about star players. Some NFL players are not just athletes, they are global icons. Think of Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, or Patrick Mahomes. These players aren't just the face of their teams, they're often the face of the entire league. But does their status afford them special treatment on the field? A 2018 study conducted by ESPN revealed an intriguing pattern. Star players tend to draw fewer penalties than average players, especially when it comes to subjective calls like holding or roughing the passer. In fact, the data showed that high-profile quarterbacks like Brady and Rodgers were involved in significantly fewer penalty calls, despite playing in high-stakes situations. One example often cited by analysts is the Brady rule, where roughing the passer penalties seem to be called more frequently when Tom Brady is hit compared to lesser-known quarterbacks. Fans of opposing teams have long claimed that the NFL protects its most marketable stars, and some statistics back this up. According to Pro Football Focus, over the last 5 seasons, top-tier quarterbacks were 20% less likely to have a holding penalty called in their favor compared to mid-tier or backup quarterbacks. But why? The theory is that star players drive ratings, and it's in the NFL's best interest to keep them on the field. The more they play, the more viewers tune in. It's subtle, but the numbers suggest refs might be conditioned to go easy on the league's most valuable assets. Racial bias. Does it exist? Now, for one of the most sensitive and controversial topics in sports, racial bias. Could NFL referees exhibit racial bias, consciously or unconsciously, when making calls on the field? A 2017 study by Sociology of Sport journal made headlines when it found evidence of racial bias in NFL officiating. According to the study, black players were 10% more likely to be called for penalties than their white counterparts. The most glaring disparities were in categories like unsportsmanlike conduct and personal fouls, calls that are somewhat subjective and rely on the ref's judgment. The numbers are unsettling, but racial bias is not unique to football. Studies have shown similar patterns in basketball and soccer. However, what's particularly troubling in the NFL is the magnitude of these discrepancies, considering that approximately 70% of NFL players are black. Critics argue that these biases reflect broader societal issues, but when they manifest on the field, they can have real consequences, potentially costing teams games and even players their careers. Imagine being flagged for a crucial penalty because of subconscious bias from the referee. It's a troubling reality that deserves more attention. Teams that are favored, the big market effect. Here's another interesting perspective. Big market teams like the Dallas Cowboys, New England Patriots, and Los Angeles Rams more likely to receive favorable calls than smaller market teams. After all, these are the franchises that bring in the most revenue for the league. Some critics believe that referees, perhaps subconsciously, tend to favor larger, more profitable teams. According to data collected by Football Outsiders, between 2000 and 2020, the 5 teams with the largest market sizes received an average of 12% fewer penalties compared to the 5 smallest market teams. This doesn't sound like a lot, but in a game where a single penalty can swing the momentum, it matters. What's even more telling is that these teams also ranked higher in overall success during this period, leading some to question whether favorable officiating contributed to their dominance. Could the NFL, whether intentionally or not, be giving preferential treatment to teams that boost ratings and increase profits? Betting and referee influence. Here's where things get really controversial: the intersection of refereeing and sports betting. The NFL has embraced sports betting like never before, with partnerships from major casinos and sports books. But with billions of dollars on the line, what role do referees play in affecting the outcomes of games, and, by extension, the flow of money? While there's no concrete evidence that refs are intentionally influencing games for betting purposes, the idea that a single call could alter the outcome of a game, and the bets associated with it, raises eyebrows. A 2021 investigation by Sports Illustrated examined 50 games where controversial referee decisions swung betting lines dramatically. In nearly 70% of those cases, the calls had a significant impact on the final score and, consequently, the bets placed. Referees have immense power, and while there's no direct evidence of foul play, the fact that a blown call or a questionable flag can influence millions of dollars in wagers creates an environment ripe for skepticism. Accountability and transparency, the missing link. Now, let's talk about accountability. How are referees held accountable for their decisions, especially when they might have changed the outcome of a game? The NFL has a process in place for reviewing calls, but many believe it's not transparent enough. For example, in 2019, the infamous NFC Championship game between the Saints and Rams was marred by a non-call on a clear pass interference penalty. This decision cost the Saints a trip to the Super Bowl, and the outcry was so loud that it led to changes in how pass interference calls are reviewed. But even with replay reviews, accountability remains murky. NFL referees rarely face public criticism from the league, and there's little transparency about whether officials are disciplined or retrained after making significant mistakes. According to a 2020 report by The Athletic, only about 2% of NFL referees are ever publicly reprimanded for errors. Compare this to other sports like the NBA, where referees' performance is more openly scrutinized. Some have suggested that the NFL needs a more transparent system for reviewing and reporting referee errors, similar to how soccer leagues utilize the video assistant referee (VAR) system. Could such reforms help reduce the perception of bias? The future of refereeing in the NFL. So, are NFL refs biased? The evidence suggests that there is a human element to officiating that's impossible to ignore. Whether it's home field advantage, star player treatment, racial disparities, big market favoritism, or the influence of betting, there's enough data to make you question the fairness of the game. But what's the solution? The NFL has made strides in improving officiating through technology and rule changes, but the reality is that as long as humans are involved, bias, whether conscious or unconscious, will always be part of the equation. The next time you're watching a game and a questionable call is made, ask yourself, is it just a mistake? Or is it part of a larger pattern? The answer may be more complex than we think.